morning. As Peter said, our reading is from Romans 5, verses 1 to 8, one of my favorite passages. Therefore, since we've been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our suffering, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely would anyone die for the righteous person. So for the good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in Christ. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Receive the word of God.
You're probably aware that we've been into a series called What's Faith Got to Do with It, and you're probably devastated that the series draws to a close today. We've been busy with this for the last 5 weeks. But if you are devastated that this is the end of the series, have no worries. You can always catch it up. All on the YouTube channel. You can watch it all again. So if you step through any part of it, just go there. You can watch it again. But also, seriously, if you have somebody in your life that stepped back from faith, a child, a grandchild perhaps, or somebody who's having a problem in this area, I really encourage you to share this with them. There is a booklet as well. There is a PDF of the material too, because that's really, it's really aimed at those people who, in fact, step back. Now, if you or you know somebody else that has done this, take a step back from faith, I want to ask you to do something difficult, and that is to be honest. To be honest. And the most difficult person to be honest with is who? Is with yourself. So be honest with yourself. And this is very hard. It's not just hard for people who maybe take a step back from faith or have a struggle with their faith. It's hard for all of us to be honest with ourselves, isn't it? Because if I'm honest with myself, I might have to apologize, or I might have to admit something, or I might have to own up to something, or I might have to recognize something that I'd rather not, I might have to humble myself. And as difficult as that is, it's all good, because self-deception always takes us in a bad direction. Self-deception always takes us in a bad direction. Self-deception never takes us into a good place. So when we're honest with ourselves, when we put aside self-deception, we actually start moving in the right direction. When you're not honest with yourself, you're not going to grow, you're not going to develop, you're not going to mature, you're going to get stuck in one place. And just think how different it would be in your family, or with your ex-husband, perhaps, or your ex-wife, or somebody else in your family, if that person had been honest with themselves instead of hiding and not taking responsibility. And I want to share with you 3 quotes this morning and a question as we look at this, the end of this series of what faith got to do with it. And the first quote comes from a man called Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel is a person who teaches philosophy, and he's a retired professor in the US. And Thomas Nagel is a very, very clever man. He wrote a number of very influential books. One is called Mind and Cosmos. Okay, it's a great title for a book, but the subtitle is more interesting. One, Materialist Neo-Darwinian conception of nature is almost certainly false. Okay, that sounds quite a mouthful, doesn't it? Now, let me tell you, Thomas Nagel is an atheist, self-proclaimed. can't explain. We often say, oh, that's God. That must be God. It's called the God of the gaps. In other words, wherever there's a gap, we pull God in. And that's not what we are meant to do, of course, but we do it. Now, Thomas Nagel, in this book, he says, atheists do the same thing with Darwinian evolution. Whenever there's a gap, they just say, oh, well, you can explain it by evolution. You can explain it through the process of evolution. But, he says, you can't explain everything by evolution. You can't explain things like values and meaning through evolution, because those things couldn't have evolved. They're not biological processes. They come from somewhere else. Nagel is ready to be commended for his honesty. He is an atheist who's saying that the conception that many atheists have of the way the world works just can't be so. But the point I want to point you to from Thomas Nagel comes from a book called The Last Word, another book called The Last Word. And he says this, and now this is big. He says this, I want atheism to be true. And I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. Now, that is shockingly honest. He says, it bothers me that there are thinking believers. There are believers who are intelligent, thinking people. But I don't want there to be a God. Friends, this is an extraordinary admission. Because once you acknowledge this, it's terrifying. Because there's a massive difference between I don't believe this and I don't want to believe it. There's a massive difference between I don't believe it and I don't want to believe it. In the first category, I don't believe it is, I used to believe it, but I don't anymore. I went to university and there were all these things that I was taught that I couldn't reconcile with my faith. Or I don't believe because something happened to me, I read something, there were unanswered questions, and so I just realized I couldn't believe this anymore. I don't believe this anymore. But when you say I don't want to believe it, it's because you stop believing because faith got in the way of your life. Because you got to a point where faith was actually restricted. And so you got rid of faith, and then you developed an argument to explain why you don't have faith anymore. And that's why so many people that you will engage in discussion with around this, if you have to ask them this question, if I could answer all of your questions, I've done this a couple of times with people. Ask you, who did Adam and Eve's children marry, and who created God? These questions that people ask. And I say to them this, if I could answer all of your questions, which I can't, but if I could answer all of your questions satisfactorily, in a way that pleases you, would you then become a Christian? Let me tell you, every single person I've asked that question to has said, no. But there's something else going on. If you're really looking for answers, you can have all your questions answered. There's information out there readily available. But if your departure from faith, in other words, if you checked out of faith because you didn't want to believe anymore, or you didn't want it to be true, then information will never be enough. Never. Information is not going to do it. Blaise Pascal, who was a very, very Christian and a very intelligent man, said this, and it's very true. People almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find abstract. People almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. And friends, we are all guilty of this. Very few of us are on a truth quest. In other words, very few of us wake up every day prepared to give up all of our beliefs, all of our presuppositions, to say we only want truth. And if I find the truth, I will give up everything I believe up to this point. If I can just find the truth. I don't know anybody like it. We are not quest, we are on a happy quest. We will change our values, our beliefs, our presuppositions to make ourselves happy. And if we're not happy, we'll adjust. St. Augustine says this: we love the truth when it enlightens us, but we hate it when it convicts us. We love the truth when it enlightens us, we hate it when it convicts us. Think back. Maybe you've had an argument with somebody recently, or maybe a long time ago. Maybe you're a very good person, you don't argue with people. But think back to an argument you had with your parents when you were younger, or with your wife, or whoever. In that argument, were you really seeking the truth, or were you trying to get your own way? And maybe you got your own way and you won the argument with your child or with your spouse or something. Or what can often happen, what happens to be, in the middle of the argument you realize, I'm actually wrong, they're actually right. Now let me ask you what I've never done. So maybe I'm sure you're a better person than I am. Do you at that point say, oh, okay, I surrender, you're right, I'm wrong? Now, how many have ever done that? Yeah, good, okay. We don't stop arguing, do we? Even when we realize that we're wrong. Because we must win the argument. And you walk away, you win the argument maybe because you're better trained, or you can just last longer, or you can shout louder, or the other person has to go or something. You win the argument, but you come away and you realize you were wrong. I was wrong. And when we don't acknowledge what we suspect to be true, when we don't look for fear of what we might see, then there's something else going on here. There's something else operating. All the arguments, all the reasons, all the justifications are not enough. There's something more to this that I'm willing to acknowledge. And let me have to be honest. I don't want to believe. All the reasons that you gave for stepping away from faith, all these arguments that you raise, regular reasons, could it not be one of these three things that is operating? The first is, if I acknowledge that there is a God, then I'm guilty. I'm guilty. There are things in your past that are so big, so bold, so embarrassing, that even just thinking about them makes you feel ashamed. You try to keep them hidden. You sweep them to one side. And we call them what? Mistakes. What's that? Mistakes. But we know that they're more than mistakes. They're what the Bible calls sin. Because of my willfulness, because of something that I did that I shouldn't have done, I've hurt somebody, I owe somebody an apology, and the damage from my actions follow me around. And I really don't want to open that door. I don't want to go there again. If there is a God, I'm guilty. Secondly, if there is a God, I'm not only guilty, but I'm accountable. I'm accountable. We don't want to be accountable. Ever since the Garden of Eden, the whole story of the Garden of Eden was about people who don't want to be accountable. We don't need God because we want to be God for ourselves. It's the illusion of autonomy. The illusion of autonomy. I am the captain of my own ship. I am the master of my own destiny. But friends, to live like that always leads to regret. Unaccountable people make regretful decisions. And when unaccountable people get married, it leads to a marriage with unresolvable conflict. A lack of accountability is the child who is like like Emma, what is known in KwaZulu-Natal, when she was about, 2 or 3. And you would try to help her with something, she would stamp her feet literally and say, I do it self. And then you could laugh. dressed like, I don't know what, something. I thought somebody had to put a sign around her neck and say, this child dressed herself. We take no responsibility for what she's wearing. I do it self. And when two people who have that attitude get into a marriage, it's good. I had a couple that I married a number of years ago. He was a very good and keen golfer, a very talented golfer as well. And he used to play golf. He played league golf at a very high level, and he would play golf a whole Saturday and a whole Sunday for the man. And she was very close to her mom, and she really wanted to love spending time with her mom. And she would go and have supper at their house 2 or 3, 4 times a week. And the two of them got married. And I tried to say to them as gently as I could, she's going to have to make some announcements. Because she found his golf a problem. He would leave at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, get back at 10 o'clock on Saturday night, and it was the same on Sunday, every weekend, virtually. And she couldn't stand it, it was too much. He didn't like the fact that they would have to go to them, he got on very well with his in-laws, so that wasn't a problem, but just he didn't want to go there 3 or 4 times a week. And I said, you're going to have to make some allowances for one another. You're going to have to give up some of your golf sometime. You're going to have to give up some of your time with your parents. Because this now becomes the primary relationship. Well, neither of them would budge. The marriage, I don't think, lasted a year. I saw them about 6 months or 8 months into the marriage. And it was clear that the thing was irretrievable. Why? He wouldn't give up his golf, and she wouldn't give up her money. And they were sticking to that. And I came away from that feeling, if only they had agreed just to give a little, the marriage may have been to last. But they were wonderful people. They were wonderful people. But it couldn't survive. I do it self. If you're in this illusion of autonomy, you're afraid if you admit there's a God, you will have to submit to God, and nobody wants to submit. We resist the things that are good for us. We lead loud, busy, hectic, active lives where we are busy all the time until things get our attention. And one of us will be very deep here. But I was thinking about it this week, actually. And all those who've been through this COVID journey, really seriously. And how it brings things into focus for us. How it makes us appreciate things in our lives. And how people often will say, well, there's no place for God or no place of faith in my life until my father or my mother or my brother or somebody got sick, very sick, and in the stone with COVID. And then we have to reassess. They say there are no atheists in a COVID ICU ward. There are no atheists in a COVID ICU ward. Because I want to be autonomous until there's a major problem. So, if there's a God, I'm accountable. I'm guilty, I'm accountable. And thirdly, I'm wrong. Pride is the thing in us that won't admit that we were wrong. What makes it so difficult to say I was wrong? When we know it's the shortest route to what is right. Humility is always the way forward. Humility always makes you bigger, wiser, smarter, always makes you open to new information. I don't want to admit I'm guilty. I don't want to admit I'm accountable. I don't want to admit I'm wrong. And it's not an argument, it's a response to avoid guilt, to avoid shame, to avoid accountability, to avoid admitting I'm wrong. The arguments against God come after the decision to reject faith. And that's what happens. People have an initial season of faith. And some of you have seen this in your own children, and some of grandchildren, and people around you. So there's a time in the children's church or the Sunday school, and they get confirmed, and they're involved, and then something happens, and they check out. People decide, I don't want God or faith in my life anymore, for getting in the way. And And they need some reason to support that argument. Nagel says, I don't want God to be. I don't want God to be. And friends, if you or anybody you know is in that place, then I have ridiculously good news for you. Amazingly good news. Because when we acknowledge that it's my resistance, not God's existence, that is the problem, we've stepped into an epic narrative of God pursuing a relationship with a rebellious race, a stream of humanity that has struggled with submission to God since the beginning of time. And maybe, just maybe, Jesus is correct. But Jesus says that if there is a God, there is forgiveness. There is forgiveness. Our sin, or our mistakes, if you prefer, becomes a platform for God to demonstrate His love for you and for me. Romans 5 and verse 8, Paul says this, that God demonstrates, God displays, God shows His own love for us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Mistakers, nobody's perfect, but sinners. People who admit to themselves, I did some of this stuff on purpose. I wanted to hurt that person. Or I wanted to win. Atheists often ask, why didn't God just forgive everybody? Why didn't God just wave His hand and just forgive everybody? Why all this blood and gore? Why the crucifixion and so on? The answer is actually in verse 1 of this passage. Then Paul starts this passage saying, therefore we have been justified through faith. We have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. You see, God isn't in the sin management business. God isn't in the sin management business. God isn't not looking to just manage our sin. God is in the relationship building business. God wanted a relationship with us. God didn't just want to deal with our sin. He dealt with our sin so that we could have a relationship. He could have a relationship with us. And every relationship is based on sacrifice. Every healthy relationship is based on sacrifice. God sacrificed. He demonstrated His love for us by stepping into our humanity. The example I told you before about the couple that are married. If they had been prepared to sacrifice just a little bit, I think they would still be happy. Every relationship is based on sacrifice. And God wanted a relationship with us. And so He sacrificed Himself for that relationship. But also, every offense requires forgiveness and restitution. And this is what God does for us in Christ. He forgives us, He demonstrates His forgiveness to us, and He makes restitution in Himself. If God is right, if Jesus is right, and there is a God, the God of Jesus, then there is forgiveness, and there is relationship. Because when you resist accountability, you resist relationship. There is forgiveness, there is relationship, and there is truth. And the truth of who God is the basis for our sense of justice, for our sense of right and wrong, for our whole understanding of morality. The explanation for all oughts that govern our actions. In other words, things ought to be like this. Why do we say that? Because of the truth that is in God. So, in God, there is forgiveness, there is relationship, there is truth. I'm guilty, but I am forgiven. I'm accountable. Therefore, there is relationship. And there is truth for the wrong. Friends, who wants God in their lives? I answer is none of us, actually. None of us want God. I realized this, I was about 18 at the time, and I realized that this is actually true of me. As frightening as that sounds, but if you really open us up, you go deep into us, look deep inside of us, into our very center of our being, there's a part of us that says to God, I do it myself. Who of us wants God? Well, none of us. But who of us needs God? Every single one of us. Let's pray. Father, this is perhaps the hardest thing for us to do. To admit that just maybe, we are guilty. I am guilty. Just maybe, I'm not autonomous and free to do what I please when I'm actually accountable. To admit that I might be wrong. And so that's hard for us to do. Very, very difficult. But thank you that in you there is forgiveness. There is the promise of relationship. And there is truth. And thank you that as we come to you today, we come to you knowing that you offer us forgiveness. You offer us relationship. You offer us truth. If we will just be honest with ourselves and admit that we have fallen short. And admit that we need you in our lives. We confess today, Lord, that actually we want to do our own thing. We want to have things our own way. But we need you.